Emily Miller of the Washington Times, who says Cam and Company is the only show that for which she will pause The Bachelorette. Thank you, Emily, for coming on the program tonight.
I thought you would be very honored to have that privilege of being the only person I would pause Bachelorette for.
I am. Now, listen, I have to. I have to tell you, I did not realize you were such a Bachelor and Bachelorette fan until I talked about this on the show earlier, because I thought you tweeted about your single self being a great shot with shotgun and pistol, and I thought you were talking about yourself, so I retweeted you thinking, Emily's a great girl, there's got to be somebody out there. So anyway, I didn't realize that you were such a fan of the show, and now I have to ask.
Wait, Jay, I can't tell if you're kidding or not.
No, I had no idea you were a fan of the show. I really...
Well, the Bachelorette this season is named Emily, so it does get a little confusing in my tweets when I'm tweeting about Bachelorette Emily. And I have to say, this Emily is Bachelorette Emily as well, but this Emily Miller is not on a reality show.
Yet. Yeah. Although, let's. I mean, we could talk about this, Emily.
Okay.
So anyway, so is the Bachelorette? Was she shooting tonight?
Yes, and it's like my favorite show. And she's in her hometown dates this week with the 4 finalists, and she went to Idaho with one of them, and he brought out shotguns, and they started doing clay shooting, and she was a pretty good shot. He was really good. And the next thing, he brought out handguns, and they started shooting. And I thought, this is on ABC News, one of their most popular shows.
Right.
And they made it really cool, too. So it was cool.
I love it. All right, so ABC is friendlier to firearms in the Washington, D.C. area. That's certainly the case. You have another unbelievable story of the mistreatment of one of our military heroes in Washington, D.C., who happened to run afoul of the district's asinine gun and ammunition laws. This is the third vet that you have found in what, about a month?
Yeah, about that period.
This is unbelievable.
Since Memorial Day, I'll say.
Since Memorial Day. All right, so let's talk about who is the latest. Adam Meckler, Specialist Adam Meckler.
Adam Meckler. And, we've talked so much, Cam, about how the city, D.C., uses these firearm laws to unfairly prosecute these veterans. This time, they've used the ammunition laws, which I have to say, in all my, I've been working on getting a gun in D.C. and going up against these D.C. laws. It never really occurred to me to look that closely at the ammo laws. I did know when I first got a gun, one of the laws at the time on the books was that you could only possess, you as a registered handgun owner, could only possess ammunition the same gauge or caliber as your gun. So when I got a gun, I was sort of confused because, first of all, I couldn't transport the gun at that point, and I couldn't get ammunition before I had the gun. So it was a little confusing.
Right.
But the D.C. Council this year, when they passed this new firearms law, they wrote that they changed it so that you could possess ammunition in any gauge and caliber, because they finally realized and listened to the gun owners in D.C. and realized that we go to the range and borrow guns or rent guns and try friends' guns, and so you're just going to have random rounds in your bag. And it should not be a crime. It's ridiculous. And when I wrote that story about the new law this spring, I didn't really think it through about how does this affect someone who's not a resident, because it just would never occur to me. Obviously, it makes no sense to arrest someone for ammunition without a gun, except for that, of course, is exactly what D.C. does when they want to.
Right.
So Specialist Adam Meckler, he was in the military for 9 years. He served for 15 months in Iraq and then 15 months in Afghanistan. He did like really hard work stuff, and dangerous things. And anyway, when he got out, he was only out for about 15 days of the military, and he was still living at Fort Belvoir in Virginia. And he had to go drop off some papers at the VFW building, which is in D.C. It's about 4 blocks from the White House. So he had a whole bunch of papers, and he went in, and went through the magnetometer and the screening, like those little airport screening things, and it knocked all the papers over and made a big mess. And they sent him back to get something else the next day. So the next day, he thought ahead, and he's like, I should probably put it all in a bag so I don't make such a mess. So he just grabbed his first aid bags. He's a medic in the Army, and which he used to go to the range to do medic coverage stuff, and he uses to go to the range personally. Just grabbed his bag. He checked it carefully to make sure there's no knives, thinking I'm going through a metal detector in D.C., put the papers in, went to the building, walked in, and he got through security. He was waiting to get waved in, and the security guard, he said, had this crazy look on his face. And he goes, and they wouldn't let me through. And he kept thinking, he said, I was thinking in my head, what could I possibly have in my bag? He goes, I knew I didn't have my guns because I'm careful about locking them up. He's like, I was careful about the knives. What could it be? And then the head security went over and looked in the screen and turned around and yelled, "Cuff him." So out of the blue, like some security come and grab him, put metal, steel handcuffs on him, pull him out. Then they close down the whole lobby, tell everyone it's this huge federal building, the VFW in D.C. It's inside the Veterans Affairs Regional Building, right, like I said, near the White House. Yelling at everyone to back out the back door, telling everyone that coming down the elevators, get back in the elevators, clearing the halls, like as if he had a bomb in his back, literally. I mean, crazy. And he's like, what is it? What is it? And they just said, you have ammunition. And he still couldn't figure out what the problem was with this. Well, anyway, they take him, they walk him down the hall with like one armed guard in front of him, one arm in back, and he says as he was walking, he was just thinking, I've done this so many times in Iraq. We would grab them out of their villages because they had IEDs or they were about to blow things up or they had a stash of arms. But for ammunition, like he was thinking it through, and he's being marched down the hall like a terrorist. And they throw him in the room, and then some higher-level federal officers came down and started interviewing him. And they said, "Are you aware that ammunition is illegal in D.C.?" And he said no. At this point, he didn't know what was in his bag, and they never told him. It ends up it was 14 rounds of 9mm. And just, he's now thought back over it over time. This happened last September.
Okay.
He's thought back over it, and he said, I remember being at the range with my father-in-law who gave me a magazine, and I just must have emptied it in my bag. Not, he said, I don't even know, because he's like, I have random rounds in all my bags. It's all of us gun owners do,
Right.
I mean, it could happen to any of us. So they put him in, they handcuffed him really tightly. They wouldn't let him go, and then they put him in a big van or truck that said Homeland Security on it, took him to Metropolitan Police Department in D.C., and meanwhile, one of the security guards at the VFW said, this happened a week ago. I'm sure they'll let you go. So he was like given this sort of false hope, and it also tells me that there's a habit of this, and they do sometimes let people go. Well, then when they got to D.C., they threw him in jail for a couple of hours. Then they processed him, and then the processing officer said, "I can't believe they're arresting you for this. This is crazy. I've never seen this." So he gets bailed, he gets out, and he had hired he was between jobs, obviously. He was leaving the military, and he was terrified that of anything he would lose his high-level security clearance because he had all these job applications out there where you say, have you ever been arrested for, a crime? And he's got this outstanding thing. So his father-in-law represented him, and he decided just to try to get it past him as quickly as possible. So he pled to a misdemeanor. And got community service and probation. However, and I'll get to this next week, which you'll have to stay tuned for. He had to ask to go on the gun offenders registry. That'll be in part 2 of the story. But it's what's just outrageous is, you're a gun owner. How many times have you just left rounds in your bag? Didn't have any of the restricted kind of ammunition. He didn't have a gun. He had nothing. I mean, what was he going to do? Throw the bullet, sew it into someone's eye? I mean, what could you possibly do?
Well, more, and I mean, along those same lines, Emily, I mean, how much safer is Washington, D.C. now that Specialist Meckler's been taken off the streets? I mean, honestly, this is absurd. I would love to get man on the street reaction from, folks in the Anacostia neighborhood about this. Aren't you glad that Specialist Meckler's been? Don't you feel safer now in your high crime neighborhood that, these are the types of folks who are being arrested and charged with violating the gun laws in D.C.?
Very good point. And shutting down a federal building. He said the whole time he was detained. By the time they pulled him back out of the office, the lobby of this huge federal building was still locked down. Nobody was allowed out of their offices. There was no gun. I don't even.
Not to mention, there were far more than 14 rounds of ammunition when you counted up all of the law enforcement officers there.
Oh, well, that's a very good point. Good point. Well, and so I went back to he's now the chairman of the city council, Phil Mendelson, who wrote this new law, and I went back to his office last week and said, I just looked back at this law that changed this spring. I just assumed it was for everyone, and they said no. We considered changing it for non-residents of D.C., but we decided to leave the law as such. I said, what? D.C., it's the nation's capital. You've got tourists coming through here. You've got military coming through here all the time. Why in the world is ammunition illegal? Regular, ordinary ammunition. And I couldn't get an answer, and I'm going to keep persisting until I get an answer. I called the Attorney General of D.C.'s office, and they know that obviously this case, and that the spokesman told me that it's actually very common to arrest people for ammunition. And I said, well, I'd like to find out, which I'm still waiting to hear from them, how many of these cases are tacked onto a firearms case. And I understand now if they want to bump up the charges against someone who's got an illegal gun, that's fine. I said, or how many of them are for types of ammunition that are barred in D.C.? Because I would like to know how many times someone with regular, ordinary self-defense ammunition was arrested, put in jail, and charged with a crime. I mean, it's unbelievable. Well, I asked your guys at the NRA how many places in the country have these kind of laws.
Yeah.
Apparently, it's only Chicago, Massachusetts, New York, and D.C., of course. The standard, the ones, the usual suspects, I would say.
Right.
But, I mean, I have to say, I just think this is one of those things. This is such a persecution of gun owners. And in this case, it's another example of the city going after veterans. I mean, because their job, they are paid by the taxpayer to possess guns and ammunition to protect us. This is a good thing. We should not be punishing them when they come through the city doing things like carrying their firearms and ammunition.
Absolutely. Listen, Emily, thank you so much for coming on the program. We'll let you get back to the Bachelorette, and
Thank you.
look forward to having you on again very soon.
Thank you. Take care, Cam.